Thank you for tuning in to Beverly Hills to Barnyard with Sherita Herring. I'm excited about my guest today. Before we go any further, you are listening to the WCEG network. Excuse me, excuse me. Looks like something went down wrong. You're listening to the WCEG network. Excuse me. Sorry. We are the gosh, why would that happen right at the start of the show, right? Oh my gosh. Okay, Sherita J. Herring here on Beverly Hills to Barnyard, and I'm so happy to have my very special guest. You're listening to the WCEG network on WCEGtalkradio.com or watch live on your smart TV, YouTube, and the WCEG network. We're the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like WCEG on Facebook, follow on Twitter or Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests and not the WCEG network. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now, my very special guest today is also a very dear friend and colleague, Haywood Galbreath. And let me give you a little bit of history about this award-winning history-making photojournalist. Haywood had the distinct privilege of being the only Black press photojournalist to have covered and been in the press pool of 6 US presidents, where he personally photographed 3 sitting presidents. And in 2008, he also photographed the young Senator Barak Obama while he was visiting California as he was running as the presidential candidate. Excuse me. In 1994, Haywood made history where after petitioning the court, his company became the first Black-owned news photo service in the history of America to have equal access alongside mainstream media, where he has covered the Emmy Awards, the prestigious Breeders' Cup, and more. One of his greatest career achievements is being the only photographer to have daily access to the largest criminal court case in America, the O.J. Simpson trial, which was deemed the trial of the century. In 2004, Haywood established the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Excuse me. It is a nonprofit that teaches youth photography, photojournalism, and broadcasting. In 2013, he won the Unsung Hero Award, which is a national award from the Ford Motor Company Foundation, and it was for his wonderful work that he does with young people. I could go on and on and on about my dear friend, but instead of doing that, I'm going to bring him on so you can not only meet and greet, but see this very handsome guy. So Haywood, how are you, dear?
Good morning. I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I am amazing. Amazing, but besides this cough that is kind of creeped up. So
if you need to, you can grab your bottle of water.
Yeah. Well, I wish I would have brought it over here with me, but I'll be all right. Haywood, we've been talking about having you on for quite some time. I'm honored that you're on with me today. And that being said, let's just jump right in. First of all, with me mentioning about you starting your news service, and we see the screens behind you. So many people probably aren't even aware of how much coverage you do daily. So let's talk about your news service. Give us a little history on that.
Well, my news service came about, I think it was about 1991. My career started in Fort Lauderdale, Miami. I went to work at a television station, WSGVN 7, which was headquartered in Miami, but they had a satellite office in Fort Lauderdale. So what happened was I didn't like the way they covered the Black community. And one particular day, this report came on, and when it went off, I got on the phone and I called the TV station, and I was raving about, the way they was covering. And the reporter was so nice. He said, well, I tell you what, if you don't like it, why don't you come down and apply for a job? So I went down and I applied for a job, and I became a sound tech for a year. And back then there was a two-team crew, cameraman and the guy that carried the recorder to record the video and audio. And so I was a sound tech for a year, and it started from there. I had a desire because at 10 years old, looking at a news report, not liking what I saw. When it went off, God spoke to me and said, you see what you just saw? In the years to come, this is the medium that will be used for people to determine what they think about people. So right then and there, I decided I wanted to be a photojournalist. I didn't know it was photojournalist. I just said to myself, I want to take pictures of people doing things, especially Black Americans, so that I could tell the story more truthful about Black Americans and all Americans. And so when the opportunity came, I started taking my camera with me and started taking pictures, and nobody ever wanted them until one day I got the picture of the first female to make it to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Her and her sons ran a marijuana business in South Florida. And so they called her and they were walking her in, and I captured her image, and no other newspapers were there. So I called the newspaper and they took a look and they decided to use it, and it started from there. And,
Wow.
that's when I started my career documenting what goes on. And when I came to Los Angeles, I went to work for the Los Angeles Sentinel, the largest Black newspaper west of the Mississippi. And what I found out was, even though they were the largest, they didn't get to cover major events. So I started petitioning the organizations that put them on, including the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the entertainment industry. And I had the help of Congresswoman Maxine Waters and some others that back then, Mayor Tom Bradley, who was still mayor when I came to Los Angeles. And then the Sentinel went through a downsize, and so my position was eliminated. And that's when I started my news photo service and went out there and started petitioning to be able to cover major news events, especially those that involved African Americans, because the nature of the business then and still now, some 30 years later, I've been here for 33 years, is that Caucasian-owned news organizations are given more access to cover Black Americans than everybody else, than those who are part of those races and ethnicities. So I continue to fight. It's a fight continuously to be able to do it, but that's when I started, and I made an impact. I opened the door for more African American photojournalists to come in, and I still get phone calls from African American photojournalists and some reporters talking about, it's still hard for us to get in. What you gonna do about it? Like, what am I gonna do about it?
Haywood, there's and unless you are a part of it, you don't realize how controlled things are, as far as like for instance, when I was on the air in Kansas City, I interviewed a reporter that had worked, I think, with the Washington Post. I'm trying to remember because it was way back in 2008. And it was surprising to me. She said, Sherita, it is so controlled as far as the racism, the way that the media projects. She said, for instance, if there is a big news story in a white community, and what a reporter will do is find someone Black in the audience and interview them about what just happened. That way it is perceived by the viewers that the crime that just happened was by a Black person. And she said that they're trained in that way, the same way like when that big shooting took place down in Hollywood, and those guys had on all that armor and they were just shooting and shooting. I don't know if you remember that, Haywood. It's probably been 10, 15 years ago. And they said that it was South Central Los Angeles. And I think it was Mark Ridley Thomas then that wanted to name the different areas throughout South Central LA so that that negative connotation would be taken away from there. But it was after that big shooting because they didn't want to impact the tourism that goes to Hollywood. So they said it was South Central. What do you think about Haywood? You know, and what is your view as far as that?
Instead of watching the news all day long, late into the night, and what you just said continues to happen. My manager will call and she'll be heated. And now that I'm more of a statesman, I'm like, okay, it's okay. It's going to be all right. It's okay. But you're supposed to be screaming too. You always go like, no, I'm not screaming like I used to because it's going to work out. But that's what they do, because they said everything south of the 10 freeway is South Central LA. And if you were to go south of the 10 freeway, you see that you go over into West LA also in very affluent neighborhoods that there's not too many of us. But yes, that's what they do. And there's something else that I tell people to watch when they look at the news, and you hit on it. Whenever there's a negative story taking place, just like you said, even in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood, they will find a Black person. Now, the visual of that is this. It is connecting Black people to something negative. And that is what they do visually all the time. I saw a press conference where it was in, I think, South Carolina, and I had been paying attention to it. And there were really no Black officials there. It was all mainly white officials. They found some Black people to put behind the white officials so that you would see Black people in the frame. And like I said, that does a visual thing to you. That connects Black people with negativity. And so when you look at Black people, you think, they always got something to do with negative. I don't want to have nothing to do with them. And it's so visual and subliminal. It's very subliminal. I remember one time on I think it was NBC, and they were talking about most drugs bought and taken by white Americans. At the same time, the reporter was doing the voiceover talking about most drugs taken and bought by white Americans. They were showing Black Americans. So even though he's
saying that,
what you saw, the visual which sticks in your mind was Black people. And that's what I have fought for. I guess I've been a journalist for 40 years now, and I fought against the visual of it. When I first went to work in television, we would go out and ride along with the police when they was doing these drug busts. And you would see white guys bent over the hoods of their Mercedes and BMWs. But when we went back to the television station, they cut it so all you saw was Black guys getting arrested. When you picked up the newspaper the next day and you saw the still photos, all you saw were the Black guys being arrested, hands up against the wall and everything. And I started screaming out loud. I went to the largest newspaper and one of the largest newspaper conglomerates, which is the Miami Herald is part of it. And I started screaming at them like, why are you doing this way? There was a bunch of white guys in here. Why are you only showing the Black guys? And
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So they started listening to me, and they actually did a series and made posters and put it up in the newspaper of different people in the community talking about how the Miami Herald covers. And they used me as one of the posters to talk about how they had begun to change their coverage of the Black community.
And that's why I love doing this show, because I want us to talk about things that not only help with cultural awareness, race relations, while we also expose individuals' careers and others that would not have had an opportunity to get the exposure. But just like a lot of one of my dearest friends that I've had since I was 5 years old, since George Floyd, she's realizing some things that she and I never even talked about in all of my lifetime and our friendship, which is almost 60 years. But what I didn't realize is how much I had been trained that we keep it to ourselves. We don't talk about these things outside of the house or unless we're talking to someone that is also Black. But if we don't talk about these things, then even my friend, I mean, if she didn't know, then how can she also speak up more and mention these things even at her dinner table or whatever? So she and I have talked about more about what I've even experienced as far as racism than in our entire friendship. So I was mentioning that to say that I saw some research, Haywood, from the Department of Sociology, and they were even talking about how Black men are overrepresented as criminal suspects when it comes to, even if there's domestic violence with celebrities, they will report it differently. Or what did it say? It said Black men were presented as criminals, citing arrest information, details of official charges, and mentioning law enforcement officers' involvement more often than white men. It was also discovered that these mentions occurred 3 times more often on Black men celebrities than when they were reported as white. Secondly, it says excuses for men's violence against women when the coverage is of white men was reported versus not being reported for Black men. And so unless everyone becomes more aware of this, the perceptions that they have as us of Black people is always going to be more of a negative connotation, you know?
Yes, and it's on purposely done that way.
Yeah, that's which is sad.
I came up, I always talk to people about the fact that I had 2 families. I had my Black family and I had a white family. The
Mm-hmm.
man that I call my father, more than my biological father, more than my stepfather, is a white man. Because at 13 years old, he came into my life and he became, as the country song goes, and we know I love country music, as the line in the country song goes, the father he didn't have to be. That's what he became to me. He had 3 more kids, but he made me feel like I was the only child that he had.
Mm-hmm.
And until he passed away 2 years ago, that was my daddy. As a matter of fact, my stepfather knew it. The people of my hometown knew it. That was, and when I would come home, it was so interesting. I would go see my Black friends, and they would look at me and go, "You been to see your white daddy yet?" And I remember a couple of times I had just gotten home. I'd barely been home, not even a good day, and I went to see them, and they like, "You been to see your white daddy yet?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." And I remember them looking at me and saying, "Now don't think you've gotten too big for him, but what all he did for you, you need to go see him." And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'm going to see him. I'm going to see him. I just got home. I just can't. Y'all look, y'all in the hood. Y'all in the hood where I landed. So I got to go on the other side of town to see him." And so what I tell the people, most especially on Facebook, because on Facebook until they changed it up, there was this issue of race going back and forth, talking about racism in America. And most white people would get upset because what I have learned in life, that if you say anything counter to what white Americans think is or should be, the first words out of their mouth is, "You hate white people." And I would always laugh when they said that. And I'm like, you might not have go check my background and find out how I came up. And then
Mm-hmm.
some white Americans that would see the conversation, they would go like, "Nah, I don't think so. Um, you need to do what he says do. You need to go check his background." But the issue of race in America is real, no matter what politicians say, no matter what some entertainers or activists on the other side may say it's real and systematic racism is real. And I tell you what is happening. And I don't want to bring in politics or a certain politician who's running for president again. Racism is real. The hatred is real. But what this politician did that has a name that I won't mention, he opened the door to normalizing being racist openly. That's what he did.
Yes, and that's why it's so important for all of us to talk about it, because the only way that we can start truly evening the playing field and educating is the discussion of it. Because even today, I can walk, if I haven't been to a particular area, and if I am, for instance, the only Black person in, it doesn't matter your caliber of, as far as finance, title, whatever, depending on where we go, we still experience that. And until we can continuously discuss it, then it can't be addressed. Haywood, there's a few questions that I have for you, and also what we didn't discuss, even talking about you before even getting behind the camera, you were once in front of the camera. So let's talk about you and a little bit of your acting career before I go into some other questions.
Yes, ma'am. That was something else that as a child, I decided I wanted to be an actor and a stuntman. And it was very difficult being from where I'm from. And this probably jump out to a lot of people. I am from Mayfield, Graves County, Kentucky. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, that is because in 2021, on December the 10th, my hometown, Mayfield, Kentucky, was almost completely destroyed by, I think it's either F3 or an F4 tornado. It hit that night and it almost destroyed it. The tornado started, I think, in Arkansas, where you are, and it cut a path across through Kentucky north. It went northeast. And when I heard about it at 9 p.m. out here, which was like 10, 11 o'clock there, I listened to the reports from 9 p.m. to 5 o'clock a.m. in the morning here about the destruction that was taking place. As a matter of fact, I had several friends that were killed, and one ex-girlfriend was killed in the tornado, also in my hometown. And the pictures, there's nothing really left of the downtown that was there when I was growing up, and then also in a couple other places. So I decided at 10 years old that I wanted to be an actor and a stuntman. Now, my hometown is made up of a few factories, but mostly farms. The Black people in my hometown, they worked mainly for white Americans. That was their occupation, working for white Americans. My grandmother, as a matter of fact, and several aunts and uncles worked for white Americans that owned businesses. And my grandmother, when my grandfather had a stroke, I went to live with my grandmother at 7 years old to help her take care of my grandfather out on the farm. And I always talk about she worked 2 jobs to save the family farm. You know that old famous working to save the family farm.
Yeah.
That's what my grandmother did. Now, I was too young to get a job, so I had to take care of him. And that's a whole different story, being out there in the farm at night, like you found out in Arkansas. When it gets dark, it gets dark.
It gets dark.
And hearing the little dogs barking at night, wondering what they're barking at. So when I told people that I wanted to be an actor, everybody looked at me like, well, what are you talking about? and you know, once again, white Americans would look at me and say, they would ask me, well, what you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, actor, stuntman. They look at me like I was crazy, and then they would say, wait a minute, what's your last name? Oh, yeah, your family works for my family. I tell you what, when you grow up, if you're a good boy, you can come to work for me too. Now, wait a minute. I'll probably be retired. You go to school with my son, don't you? I'm like, yes, sir. Well, then you can go to work for him. I'm like, okay. I never would talk back to him because I was raised, no matter who it is, you don't talk back to adults. You be respectful. But deep
Mm-hmm.
down inside, I said, I'm gonna prove y'all wrong. And I grew up wanting to be an actor stuntman, and that he caused a lot of problems for me, a lot of problems for my parents, most especially when I got older. You know, at 22, I'm talking about setting myself on fire and jumping out windows and jumping out buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
That's when they really started looking at me like, that boy's crazy. And
And you
so
played on, oh, you played on Miami Vice, right? Back
they
in the
don't
day.
mind me vice for 5 years. So I had the opportunity to go to Florida, and I got me an agent, and she got me a couple of bit parts on some movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then Miami Vice came, and she called me to go to Miami Vice one day, and I stayed for I stayed a whole 5 seasons. I went from just being an OCBer, as we were called, in the background in the squad room. If you look at Miami Vice today, you will see me on Miami Vice. If you look hard enough, you'll recognize me. I went from doing just that to doing some stunts. But the best part of it was I became Philip Michael Thomas's personal photographer and bodyguard, and that's how I got to Los Angeles.
Yeah, and you matter of fact, as far as bodyguard, you're back to doing that again, right?
And I'm back to being a bodyguard on Sundays. You know, I love law enforcement, and this is my opportunity now that I've gotten older to continue to participate in law enforcement in a certain way.
Uh-huh. I'm sorry. I've said no, my pit bull, I didn't put him out before I started the show. So, Haywood, we're getting close to the hour, but there's some things I wanted to ask you. What has been your greatest obstacle you've had to overcome?
The greatest obstacle I've had to overcome is the overt and the silent racism uh, in journalism.
Mm,
It's racism is predominant. Uh, like you said, they may not talk about it, but it's there and it happens. And you know, and I had to fight it to get
huh?
to cover the people I have had the opportunity to cover, and I'm so grateful to God that He made it possible. That's been my
Mm-hmm.
buddy ever since I was a little boy, walking up and down the railroad track, dreaming about doing what I do. Uh, but it's been difficult. It's still difficult. That's the greatest obstacle. And I know, and let me just say this to the listening audience. I know we've hit on racism and black and white, uh, but it's there. It's what it is in America. And you can play like it don't exist if you want to. You know, it's just like if you cut yourself bad and you're bleeding real bad, you can look at it and play like you're not bleeding. But what's going to happen is you're going to bleed to death.
You'll bleed out. You're going to bleed out. And now I've got to touch on that you were part of the trial of the century. Now we've only got 2 minutes and I'm going to have to bring you back. But what was it like to be on the trial of the century, the O.J. Simpson trial?
It was a once in a lifetime experience. And what I was able to accomplish had never been accomplished before by a Black person. And as far as the whole trial goes, and as far as media goes, it will never be done again by a single individual. What I accomplished will never be done again because media has changed so much since that day. And I have the record of being the only photojournalist that was in there every day. Now, there was a couple more that were in there for different organizations, but I was the only one that was in there every day. I think I took like 19,000 images. We could talk about what was done to me. And a few years ago, you and I did a program where the head of the court came on and she basically said, you know, Haywood talked about things that were happening to him were racist, and I played it off. But you know what? He was right. It
Yeah,
was.
yeah. Well, Hayward, there's so much for us to talk about. I can't believe we are down to 1 minute before we are off the air. So, Hayward, how would someone contact you? Because you have a wonderful nonprofit also showing young people photojournalism, empowerment. So how can they reach you?
They can reach me at the email
Excuse me.
Haywood, HAYWOOD at mpji.org, which stands for Minority Photojournalism Institute. And that's also the website, mpji.org. Go up to it, take a look around. We're doing some things. We're working with some HBCUs. And I know it's people are always talking about give, but the only way we can do this and really help a lot of people, especially those young men and women at the HBCUs, is for people to donate and help us so that I can go to those schools in person, because we can teach on air like we do, but it's better if you're looking at somebody and you're showing them how to do it in person. So I would appreciate it. And if you donate enough, I will send you one of my iconic images that are limited editions, and I'll sign it with a certificate that it belongs to you.
Okay.
And it's an original.
Well, Haywood, I want to have you back on in 2 weeks. And
okay.
So I will we'll decide on that date. We'll look at our calendar because we're at the close of the hour. But I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And again, my very special guest, Mr. Haywood Galbreath, who has actually, blown doors open when it comes to media and the bias as far as African Americans. Dear sir, I want to thank you for being on. I can't wait to have you on again. This is Sherita J. Herring with Beverly Hills to Barnyard. And again, thank you for coming on with us today. Have a wonderful day.
So much.
Next weekend. Thank you, Haywood. Have a good one.
Love you. Take care. And everybody have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.